Davius Richard's return to North Carolina Central is truly a bittersweet moment, but it does offer some upside for the Eagles offense. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And right now, new customers can get $250 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. We'll wrap up today's episode with a conversation with Liv for Hoops around Diamond Johnson's exclusion in the WNBA Draft. In segment 2, FAMU made a bigger splash than I thought. I did not expect a name like Charlie Ward to be named their head coach. We kicked this whole thing off with what I believe is the definition of a bittersweet moment. Davius Richard has returned to his alma mater, North Carolina Central, to be the Eagles quarterback coach. And I typically do try to see the bright side in situations, right? Excuse me. I typically try to see the bright side in situations, but this one, I can't help but focus on the bitter before I get to the sweet. It is truly the definition because I think it's great what he's doing, where he's doing it, the fact that he has something to do, but the fact that he is doing it, the fact that he has to do it because he can no longer play truly does sting a little bit because a year ago? Yeah, we're talking about just a year ago. Davius Richard was the most discussed HBCU prospect of his class. Davius Richard was the clear best quarterback in his class. He was a guy who we were wondering, will we finally see a quarterback drafted? All of those hopes were dashed when he had his injury in the HBCU Legacy Bowl. I talked about that injury and how it could impact the game itself on February, around that time. I didn't know if there would be people who would opt out of the game. I don't think that we had any opt-outs, but it was something I was definitely on the fence about. It had a large reach that expanded into 2025. But for Davius Richard, that injury finished his career. And I think he had a chance to make it to the league. I think he had a chance to be on a preseason roster, maybe make a practice squad roster. And as a small school quarterback, that's a big deal. That's a win. He was going to get NFL checks. He was going to be on an NFL team. That would have been a moment. And then even if that didn't happen, I thought he was a perfect candidate to be in a spring league. I had all of these high hopes, and it's not too long ago, so I still have them fresh in my mind, and it still feels almost wrong to see a year later Davius Richard to walk a sideline without his pads on, to walk the sideline as a coach and not as a player. So he ends up going, and I think he gets picked up by the Houston Roughnecks. I scratched my neck as I say Roughnecks. But anyway, he gets picked up by the Houston Roughnecks, I believe. And in the long run, he never plays another game. I believe the news of him being medically medically retired was released late last year, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was during the football season and towards the end. But this isn't new information. It's not as if I didn't know he couldn't play anymore. But this was a confirmation that that's not going to change. It was a reminder of what we already knew. And this was tough. This was tough to me. And that's the bitter side of it. But at the same time, it's sweet because a lot of people don't have plans after playing. And, man, Gerald Huggins, good friend of the show, y'all know him. But Gerald Huggins has been talking about players not having a post-career plan. And they're going to be done. At some point, your career is going to be over. It doesn't matter if it's like me. I didn't get past high school. My playing career ended a long time ago. Maybe you made it to college. Maybe, right? Maybe you even made it to the pros. And unless you don't get the chance to retire, God willing, you do. But in case you don't get the chance to retire, unless you don't get the chance to retire, your playing days are going to be over at some point, and you have to decide what you're going to do. And most people probably aren't going to make enough money to just not doing anything else. Most people who play football are not going to be able to not do anything. So that's a very bitter part of it, but it's sweet at the same time because I'll let him tell you. So he said, obviously, Richard, I said, obviously, it forced me to medically retire due to the damage, but I look at the bright side on it. Or look at it on the bright side. I feel God, and I try not to question God as much as possible. I just trust his plan, and his plan led me back to North Carolina Central. And at the end of the day, it may have been tragic, but it turned into something new. And I do believe the positive part of this is that he had something to fall back on. I don't know if his plan was to get into coaching all the time. I don't know if that was always his desire to stay close to the game in that capacity, but it allows him to stay with the game he loved. It allows him to go somewhere where he's familiar, and allows him to do something that's actually going to be productive and not still just trying to figure out what I need to do in my life. There are people who don't know what they would do when football is over. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of people who don't know what they'll do when their passion is gone, because some people's passion has a time limit on it. Not everybody's, but some. Like if you're an artist, if you're a painter, if you're a musician, right? Like if you're these things, you could do those until the day you die. There's no real time limit on that. But if you're an athletic person, whether that's football, basketball, hockey, baseball, coaching, like everything has a time limit. And he found something that could at least expand his time within his sport and also give him a new journey. Maybe this is what he does for the next 20 years of his life, of just being a coach and climbing up the ranks. But that's the good part about it. And then Coach Trey Oliver brought up something that actually caught me off guard when I read, because I didn't think about this. But he said, Richard's somebody that can manage the quarterback room, and Coach Leone can be the walk-around coordinator. I like that. Like, I never thought about the idea of this impacting the OC. He goes on to say about Richard, he's been there, he's done it, and the guys respect him. So it's good to have young guys on the staff who can run around and bring some energy, 100%, because Richard has an immediate impact on Leone, who they trust Richard to be in the room with the quarterbacks, get them prepared, have them run through film, run through drill. Like he gets all of that, and they trust him to do it. So now Leone doesn't have to worry as much about the top position on the field. Like that's the beautiful part about it is if I'm a quarterback, if I'm a coordinator, I have to pay special attention to my quarterback. It's nothing more important. But if I have somebody who I feel like is a whisperer of sorts, I can fall back a little bit. I can go spend some more time with the offensive line. And if I'm an offensive coordinator who has the luxury of not having my quarterback be my main concern, I have to spend, I don't know, 50% of my time with the quarterback. If I'm an offensive coordinator lucky enough to where I'm not in that situation, that's a blessing. Sometimes it happens because your quarterback is just that good, right? Like I'm sure Sean Payton didn't have to spend all of his time with Drew Brees. He could move around a little bit more. I'm sure Belichick didn't have to. Well, Belichick's a defensive guy, but I'm sure McVay doesn't have to do that with Stafford. He can float around and get to the wide receivers, and like he can do that more. And I know I named head coaches, but I'm trying to name offensive head coaches that are also with quality quarterbacks. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. And I'll say for Richard, it's a natural transition to me from going to be a player to being a positional coach, especially if we're talking about as a quarterback. As a quarterback, you're leading, you're doing all these things. So this is nothing new to you to lead a group of men. Matter of fact, I'm leading less men now because I'm just worrying about the quarterback room. And some of these guys on the team, when he runs around and he's saying this, they already know him. They already respect him. So it's going to be easy for them to take in the information that he's attempting to give them. I think that's another aspect that we have to highlight. The biggest winner, let's go this way. Davius Richard returning to North Carolina Central, I would say Richard is the biggest winner because he gets to have the next part of his life kind of set up in a place that he's familiar, and this could just turn to a big journey for him. Secondly, is Walker Harris. Leone is third because of the ability to walk around. But let's get back to Walker Harris. Walker Harris is used to Davius Richard. They speak a similar language. You know, they when Richard was running through the MEAC, he had Walker as his understudy. And you know that was a heavy influence on them. So the respect is there. The way they talk, they understand each other. They can describe things in a certain way. I'm sure that connection is different than Walker and Leone, if only because of the age, if only because of the positions that they were in. A coach versus player and a player versus player relationship are different. Doesn't mean one's better or worse, but they just have different dynamics involved in them. So I think that Richard being there for Walker Harris could actually really help him. It'll help. He sees the game in a different way. You have a quarterback coach who I'm sure taught you some things. And it's like, hey, man, look, this is how you do it. And remember, we had this conversation about this. This is how I see it. Remember that game where because the backup quarterback has eyes too, guys. Like the backup quarterback also talks to the starter. But remember that game against Richmond or whatever, where we saw this and you were saying that this same thing is happening with you. He can help Walker Harris slow down the game. I really believe that. I believe that I believe the addition of Davius Richard will help Walker Harris in a pivotal season. We talked about why there will probably be more pressure, should be more pressure, and he'll need to live up to these expectations in his second year as a starter. Adding Davius Richard, somebody who is pivotal to the beginning of Harris's career when he was a backup, it'll help slow down the game. It'll help somebody who's right there and reads and understands the game in a similar way. I think this will really help Walker Harris. I genuinely do. Now, as we push forward, I didn't expect Patrick Crary to be replaced by Charlie Ward. That's one that caught me off guard. Let's break down FAMU's big hire as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Upwork, and Upwork gives businesses the flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or if you need a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. Scaling your business requires you to have the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in all of these areas, and they are ready to help take your business to the next level ASAP. Finding the right talent isn't easy. If you need help with marketing campaigns, you don't want to call me. I talk for a living. If you need a spokesperson, then you call me. That's what Upwork is good for. They let you know what category that you are putting your interest in. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For the next 7 days, and matter of fact, for the next 10 days, make it the next 2 weeks, because you're going to hear the aftermath. Go to Locked On NFL Draft. I promise you, if you know your team needs a certain position, they'll have that position covered, and you can use that knowledge so you can tell your friends, yeah, man, I think that the New Orleans Saints are going to pick fill in the blank. And then when it happens, you're the genius. So Charlie Ward is a surprisingly big name for FAMU. This is a guy who is a big deal collegiately. He has some cachet, especially in the city of Tallahassee. I'm sure it's even bigger. To me, this was a shocker. And I don't know what he's going to do in the long run, but what I can say is that Charlie Ward won the Heisman while also playing basketball and then went to the NBA. The only Heisman winner to ever go into the NBA was Charlie Ward. He did that at Florida State. And I say that to paint the picture of who he is. Though he won a Heisman, I'll tell you he's probably better associated with basketball. Clearly, you see what he's coaching. And most recently, he was an assistant coach for USA Basketball during the 2025 Nike Hoops Summit. But I don't know if I had any coach in mind. I wasn't looking for FAMU to get anything. But just think about the way that the FAMU job was being discussed. The FAMU job was being discussed like, I know you don't want that. Nobody wants that. Nobody should have to deal with that. I saw it described as the worst job in the country. And I'm not here to say that they're wrong. I don't know. I know all the jobs. They might be bottom 2, might be bottom 3, might be middle of the pack. Who knows? But what I do know is that with the Patrick Crary situation, the PR for FAMU was terrible. With the Patrick Crary situation, it looked like you were cheating a head coach. That's what it looked like from the outside. So, with that being the case, you kind of think, all right, the next guy you get, you're going to have to settle for something. And I don't think that Charlie Ward is a settling job or a settling hire. I really don't. Because after Crary left, people are bashing like, man, you had this guy, and if you just would have treated him a certain way, he'd still be there. Look at the leadership. They're pointing all of these fingers, and not in a well manner. They're pointing these fingers at how bad that the Rattler job is. So now people are wondering who's going to be the next hire. FAMU goes and get a guy in the city who won Heisman as well as made it to the NBA out of Florida State, a guy who is coaching basketball for Florida State's high school. I don't think I had any expectations, but I expected them to have to settle on somebody that they didn't necessarily want to settle on. And that's not what we ended up seeing. What we ended up seeing was a splash hire of a coach who has a big name in that city, a coach who a lot of people are happy about, a coach that will probably make you forget until you play Grambling. Charlie Ward will probably make you forget about any of the fiascos that happened the year prior. And I think for FAMU, that's good. For FAMU, that's good. I don't know exactly what the reaction is going to be, what people are going to say, but I will say this. They should be happy with the hire that they made. Charlie Ward obviously has to work out. He has to come up and coach on the collegiate level and do all of this. But as it stands today, I would applaud them. I would say good job, and I would congratulate them for what they did in this. So good hire, Rattler Nation. We'll see what happens moving forward. I know we definitely have to always. I think there's a lot of people who didn't feel great about Crary, and then look what he ended up doing. So I just want to play it slow. I think that's for the best. But as we continue pushing, Liv for Hoops is going to join us to discuss Diamond Johnson because Johnson did not get selected in the WNBA draft. But is there anything at play other than her schooling? Is there a different reason on why she wasn't picked? Let's get into that and answer that question as we continue with Locked On HBCU. As we continue rolling, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the play-in is tonight. Why I keep doing that? I keep forgetting that the play-in is tonight. Well, you have a play-in tonight too. Yeah. So you got another play-in for you guys to take part in. You go ahead and do that. I keep speaking as if you're listening to this as I'm recording it. But yeah, put some money down on the play-in. Use the $5 bet if you're new to FanDuel. And if you win, you get $250 back in bonus bets. It's simple. It is your play-in. The FanDuel is essentially, or your FanDuel, first bet on FanDuel is a play-in tournament. You win and you're in with $250. Maybe you want to put some money down on the NFL draft. Who's going to have Shedeur Sanders when it's all said and done? I think the Saints probably have the best odds for that. But it's questions that need to be answered. It's questions that need to be answered. You just make sure that you're going to FanDuel.com. And when you put down your first $5 bet, if you're new to FanDuel, just make sure that it's a good bet, make a safe bet, and then you can get risky. Because your first $5 bet wins, you get $250 in bonus bets. Go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. And we're wrapping up today's episode with Liv Antilla, a.k.a. Liv for Hoops. I've shouted out a couple of times on the show, so I think it's only proper and it's only right that we finally get this done to bring her on. So greatly appreciate it, of course, Liv. And we're here to talk about the Diamond Johnson situation. Now, I felt like she checked all the boxes. I was actually going into this draft feeling confident that she would hear her name called. Did you share that same confidence, or did you have a little bit of hesitance going into the WNBA draft?
I most certainly thought Diamond was going to hear her name called. When you look at her resume, not even just at Norfolk State. So for people who aren't aware of, what she did before that, what she's done at NC State and at Rutgers, her resume spoke for itself. considering how small guards have been drafted before, I was kind of like, some people may look at that and be like, I don't know. But seeing her success at the P4 level and the mid-major level, going up consistently against bigger defenders and being able to, be an intelligent basketball player with a high IQ, use her speed, use her strength in order to negate her size. I really did not see her not getting picked at all.
So you mentioned the size, and I think that's the biggest thing. The
Hmm.
initial reaction is, oh, another HBCU player doesn't get drafted. And that's definitely a part of the conversation. But the size is probably the more credible reason someone could say she wasn't. What does Diamond Johnson do to make up for her size that you would have still picked her?
I mean, again, she just is a player who has a high basketball IQ. If you've watched, she was third in the nation in total steals, fifth in the entire nation in steals per game. So she's definitely a player who knows how to take advantage of the situation. So typically when you're playing basketball, whether you're too slow or you're too short, you just have to find what works for you. And she's been able to do that. I think a lot of the concern I was seeing is her not being able to defend bigger guards and trying to create that mismatch on the floor when she's out there. But other small guards were drafted. And so with that, I'm like, to me, you can't use that when other guards who were 5'6" were taken in the WNBA draft this season. And then on the other side, on the offense, she's just a real playmaker. Again, a high basketball IQ who can just get buckets. She can finish at the rim through contact. Her pull-up is just, I was watching clips of it. Norfolk State had made a video. It's literally on a drop of a dime. She can just pull up and hit that little short jumper. She's a great playmaker of getting assists and getting her teammates involved. So again, her size, I just think her overall skill set and basketball IQ outweighed the con of her only being 5'5".
And listen, I'm a football guy. We've said it on the show before. I'm not gonna hide that, right? I'm a football guy, and we talk a lot of NFL draft. I'm
Mm-hmm.
still trying to get a little bit accustomed to how the W works as far as draft wise. When you're talking about being a undrafted player and making a roster, what are the likelihood of her making the roster as a undrafted player? Because I often hear that late round picks struggle to make the roster.
Mm-hmm. So I really think it depends on how training camp goes. To this point, I have not seen she was invited to a training camp, but
Right.
also they may have not just put out the information yet, but I haven't seen that. And so I think it comes down to roster build. As we know, players get injured or, they may get pregnant or whatever the situation may be. So it's through training camp and through the first part of, the preseason games. What are they really seeing? They need depth in, because like Jalen Sherrod, who is from Colorado last year, she went undrafted, went to a training camp, and then she was a part of the Liberty and it became a WNBA champion last year.
Right.
And so it's really the GMs and the coaches evaluating, where do we lack depth? Where do we want to take a risk on getting more players? Did someone get hurt early on? So it really just depends team by team. The WNBA is crazy because there's only 12 roster spots and they only added one team this year. And so it's definitely different based on each WNBA team.
Okay. So we talked about the size, but we haven't really addressed the school aspect of it. As you look at her exclusion from the draft, how much of it do you think has to do with the prototypical or lack of prototypical build and the lack of what they perceive to be prototypical school?
I would say although her size plays a part, I think that does play a part in the decision. A lot of people were saying when she was at NC State, she was projected a first round draft pick while she was there. And so to see a player who had such high stock, um, at a P4 and then come to an HBCU and then suddenly they don't get drafted at all is just, we can't be naive. That has to play a part in it, considering the facts of how, and obviously projections go out the window when other players get involved and all of that. But to go from a projected first round to not being drafted through 3 rounds is just, it's quite baffling to me, especially considering her stats across all 3 schools. And so, I mean, but people can look at the MEAC and look at, the bottom 2 teams and be like, well, those 2 teams don't even count. So like those four, and I mean that very respectfully, but from an
No,
outside,
it's honest.
yes, from an outsider looking in, they're going to look at those four games like they could be perceived as stat padding games because those two teams just struggled so very much. And even in the MEAC, outside of, I'll even add UMESC in outside of the top four, Norfolk State, and obviously even in the top four, Norfolk State didn't have a close conference game the entire season. Like, their closest was like Howard the last time they played. They were averaging beating everyone by like 30 plus points. And so I'm not sure if that was what's in GM's and head coach's mind of, oh, this isn't even a good competitive conference, so her stats don't matter. But regardless of that, you look at her stats at a P4. So I am very sad for her, but she did put out a tweet that, this is nothing she hasn't been through and it's on God's time. And so I believe that if she is given the opportunity, she will kill and do what she did at every level at that all-star game down in Florida that she won the MVP of. So, it baffles me, but we have to be very realistic thinking that her going to an HBCU definitely played a part in the decision to not get drafted.
I'll tell you what really gets me is that I'm fully aware of the HBCU bias. We have these type of conversations every single year around the NFL draft. So I'm not unfamiliar with that. What gets me is the fact that she does have production at a P4 level. And that's what confuses me. So I'll ask you this. Let's say that she goes from Norfolk to Rutgers in North Carolina State after that, right? Is the order of her schooling important?
I think it is, because if she would have been started at Norfolk first and then went to Rutgers and then went to NC State, she probably would have got drafted out of NC State. Just because, even again, 2 years ago when she was there, 2 seasons ago, she was having enough productivity to where on projection boards she was a first round draft pick. And so I'm very happy she chose to bring her talent to an HBCU. And I hope that, people who never pay attention to HBCUs but decided to once she came, realize the stigma and the bias that are against HBCUs when it comes to the pros, because we can all be very realistic. Diamond was probably one of, not or the best point guard that was in that draft selection. And so the order definitely matters. And it's not surprising. I mean, I was actually very shocked when I didn't see her name called. I was like, okay, last. She's going to be the last one. Okay. There's no way she doesn't get drafted. And then when she didn't, I was like, oh. So the order definitely mattered, and it's just, that's just the way it goes, I guess.
Yeah, that's the worst part for me. In my opinion, that is the worst part. The fact that she did go to these bigger schools. She does have that tape and she still didn't get it. That's crazy to me but anyway, we don't need to get too far into the weeds on it. I'll ask you lastly, just as a quick little pivot, FAMU, what do you make of the whole Patrick Crary departure and then going to get Charlie Ward? How you feeling about the Rattlers hiring?
I think Coach Crary did what he thought was best for himself, and his family and his professional career. And so if that's what he thought was best for his step, I'm all for it. I think everyone saw what unfolded last year, and so I don't think anyone faulted him at all, and he had a really good first season to put FAMU in a good foundational spot. And with Charlie Ward, I feel like they knew right away who they wanted. They moved swiftly. They got him in because, sometimes these processes can, especially at HBCUs, can take quite a bit of time because there's still schools who had vacancies longer than FAMU that still haven't announced a hire. But I think they knew who they wanted from the jump. They moved quickly. They moved swiftly. They got him in. I think it's great because he obviously has, Tallahassee ties, roots. He had a professional career for 11 seasons, and I think that's a high selling point for a lot of young men. They really like coaches who have, even though it was back in the 1990s, they want coaches who have that experience of being in the professionals because he's still connected. He still, has that name behind him of, yes, I played 11 years only for 3 teams. Football out of it, because all respect to what he did on the field, but that has nothing to do with
Yeah,
basketball. But then
agreed.
also the success he's had at the high school level, being able to bring championships to a high school. I think, the alumni, a lot of them are happy with the decision. Obviously, AD Suggs did what she thought was best. And if that's what they see as best, I'm ready to see him get in and hopefully, you know, bring some recruits in fairly quickly and, get the ball rolling.
Agreed. Agreed. Let's see. We just talked about it in segment 2, so I shared some of those sentiments. They just heard it though. But I appreciate you so much. Of course, got to get you back on because it's been a crazy off season. At some point, we
Yes.
got to have another one of these discussions. But in the meantime, in between time, tomorrow we'll be back with Gerald Huggins to discuss the NFL draft. This draft season, WNBA, NFL, doesn't matter. In the meantime, in between time, to the next time we hear each other, family. Take care. Stay blessed. Peace.